We hold these truths to be self-evident. Corporations are not people. Money is not speech. This is not a Christian nation. And the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Welcome to Disorderly Conduct.
Megan, welcome back to another episode of Disorderly Conduct, where we expose how power really works behind the headlines, behind the money, and behind the lies. Week after week, we break down threats to democracy, the machinery of inequality, and the corruption driving our political crisis. If you want clarity, context, and a little disruption, you're in the right place. Today's episode is going to be a step-by-step breakdown of the authoritarian playbook. We're going to focus primarily on Viktor Orban in Hungary, and we're going to draw some parallels to what's happening in the United States today. Hopefully, this will make things a little bit clearer for our viewers and help you spread the word on how we take back American democracy and reinstate political equality as it was meant to be done in our system. My name is Bobby. I'm a civil litigator and a con law enthusiast, and I'll go ahead and let my co-hosts introduce themselves.
Well, yeah, I'll go next. So, guys, Jesse here, IT guy by day, armchair historian by night, and concerned citizen fighting back against a rise in right-wing authoritarianism across the globe.
Yeah, hey, I'm Joey, and I did 21 years in special operations. I think now I am just blessed to know these folks and to be part of Money Out of Politics as a co-founder with Miss Haley. And I'm really pleased. I'm very, very, very much looking forward to getting into the content of this episode in particular. I think it's super important. Thank you.
And I'm Fingers, aka Ron, aka Hey You, 30-year working musician, accountant by day, enthusiastic amateur economist by night, concerned citizen 24/7 because I can't sleep.
Oh, that's right. All right, guys, so we're going to start. Today, we're going to walk our viewers through how Viktor Orban broke democracy in Hungary, not by overthrowing it, but by rewriting it from within. No tanks, no coups, no military takeover, just a pen, a parliament, and a plan. And then, of course, as discussion goes through here, I'm sure we'll draw plenty of parallels to what we're seeing here today. So I think we'll start with 2010. Viktor Orban wins by a landslide. 2/3 supermajority, and that's the moment everything changes. So because of that number, he could rewrite the entire Hungarian political system without a single vote from the opposition. I mean, I meant to send you guys a framework, but I'm pretty sure most of y'all are familiar with this probably pretty intimately. Jesse, I think this is probably going to be one that you were clued in on. But so I don't know if any of you guys want to talk about how, the first thing he did was rewriting the rules of the game before even touching the courts. Right, before going after the media or attacking anybody, he rigs the structure itself. He redraws districts, shrinks the size of parliament, changes voting rules, and basically rewrites the constitution that future governments can't easily undo. So elections are still happening, but the system is engineered so his party can't lose. Anybody want to touch bases on, give your thoughts on the first step?
I got to be honest with you, Jesse, I'm dying to hear your thoughts about this one.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I kind of want to focus on as we're starting off with this thing is where Viktor Orban kind of came from. I think it's very important to see the shift because Viktor Orban is a masterclass in politics. He exhibits a lot of the characteristics that many other authoritarian and demagogue or politicians, if you will, that consolidate power across other countries exhibit as well. People like Erdogan, like Putin, Lukashenko in Belarus and whatnot. And one of those things is populism. When he was younger, he was actually more on the liberal side, which is very interesting, right? But with the changing tides of politics, he kind of slowly, but would ultimately shift to the extreme opposite and become pretty far right in his ideology. And I'm sure we'll cover as we continue, but a lot of the ideology that he expounds is extremely similar to what we see in America today with anti-immigration, Islamophobia, homophobia, Christian nationalism, which are the very key similar components that we are dealing with now in the United States. But yeah, Viktor Orban's rise to power is very interesting because of the way he does it in the similarities we see today. But Bobby, I don't know what part you want to focus on first, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there are 6 steps that we kind of talked about, I think, in piecemeal on this show. And I realized, we touch on this a lot, but I don't think we've ever just broken down, everything that's taken place with Pinochet, with Orban, and with Trump in today's society. I picked Viktor because it is so paralleled. And it's really a good example. I feel like, I know, Jesse, a lot of times you have said we're not doing ourselves any favor by making the comparison to Hitler. Not because there are no comparisons, but because people get drawn into the absolute psychops, right? That World War II and all of that. I mean, it's mind blowing. And I think a lot of people when we draw those parallels, they don't see them yet. But with Viktor Orban in Hungary, the parallels are just so uncanny. So I'm happy to jump in wherever you want. We could just start with his election and just go chronologically if you guys want. But yeah, I just thought this one was like a good way to break it down and hopefully help people see what's happening now based on what happened in history and like draw the consequences, like understand what's at stake. Because I think the stakes are high, but what really determines if we end up like Hungary or not, or how much travesty and tragedy has to transpire before we correct things. I feel like these parallels will help people maybe make that decision sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, one comparison I kind of want to set up and see what you guys think of in terms of how it compares to the United States is the foundation of where he came from, and not just the liberal part, but like he in his early days he would definitely be considered pro-democracy, which is a sharp contrast to where he is today. And he saw his political rise at the fall of the Berlin Wall. So when USSR had fallen, it's really when Viktor Orban kind of comes onto the political scene and starts talking about anti-communist, pro-democracy, liberal ideas, basically. And he helps found a party that is still there today. I don't know if I'm saying it correct. I think it's called Fidesz. In the Fidesz party, if I'm not saying it correctly, you guys can correct me. But the Fidesz party started off as a relatively left party. I think the literal name is like the Young Democrats or something like that, basically. And what we see is that over the 90s into the early 2000s, right before him running for the elections in the early 2000s, is a shift from this liberal idea into more what would be considered populist rhetoric, kind of shifting the party of Fidesz, saying, hey, we're pro-democracy, to, hey, maybe we should stop allowing all these Muslims in. And one of the things that Viktor Orban starts to do that I want to talk about with you guys right now, and I'm sure Bobby's going to point to this, is the history of Hungary is very important to take into consideration when we're talking about Viktor Orban or when we're talking about any authoritarian leader. Hungary has a very unique geography within Europe that's surrounded by certain mountain ranges, right? And it's a corridor, many would say, between what they would consider the Muslim world and Christendom. And for most of Hungary's history, what we see is the Hungarians fighting off waves of what they would call the Muslim horde, right, coming to take over. We see this multiple times in this area of Europe, especially in the Fritz, when the last Roman emperor died at battle with the Muslim invasion, if you will. And Hungary kind of has seen itself throughout the years as the first line of defense against the Muslim horde, if you will, kind of thing, right? The reason why I mention this, the reason why this is important, is because this is a type of rhetoric that starts to creep into Viktor Orban's speech, into his campaign, into how he talks about this, that Hungary is a Christian nation on the last line of defense. And the recent influx from the early 2010s into today of the destabilization, as we see in 2011 with Tunisia, spreading into Libya with Gaddafi, going up into Syria with Bashar al-Assad, sees a destabilizing in the region and many people starting to flee to Europe. And this mix kind of starts Viktor Orban's increased rhetoric of, we are a Christian nation and there is an invasion going on. Does that sound familiar?
And I was just gonna hit the group with it, hit the listener with it. What are we hearing right now? And Fingers, I'm dying to hear. I know how close to your heart this type of thing is, man, and I'm so interested. And I know we all have a tremendous amount of respect for Jesse, right? And so we were all, I think, having this same experience. I'm dying to hear what you have to say about this, and I have a similar experience for you, Ron. Please, what do you have?
That was my thoughts for the whole team. Just want to say that when I put this one out there today, I was like, I know everybody is going to kill this one. So
So, I mean,
Go
a few
ahead, Ron.
things. Yeah, don't be. A few things, to the point about him starting off as pro-democracy and starting off as mostly left and then destroying democracy once he gets in power, right? It's a reason that absolute power, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely is a saying for a reason, right? And it's important to recognize that your politics don't give you immunity, right? Just because you have progressive politics or you are looking out for the people, that doesn't mean that when you get in the power, you're not going to try to protect that power and hold on to the power for yourself. Consumer. But you know what I mean, right? It's like, it doesn't matter where your politics are. You're still going to feel like you're the person that needs to hold the reins. You're the person that needs to be in power, and you shouldn't have to cede power because you have so much that you want to do. And it's interesting, this is also very similar to Bukele in El Salvador and how he came to power, and how once he came to power, he also started dismantling, the organs of democracy to keep himself in power. But he started off as a progressive, started off, kind of as a student activist, and now here we are, The other thing, just geopolitically, you're talking about Hungary historically being, a corridor. Part of it is that was part of the traditional route by which the Crusades reached the middle, the Holy Land, right? If you look at a map and you realize they weren't going to throw a bunch of people on a ship because a lot of this stuff was predated really open water sailing. Like they could get through around in the Mediterranean, but a lot of that stuff, ships generally followed the coastline, which meant that most of these migrations had to happen over land, right? And Hungary is just to the east of Austria. And so all of, Western Europe kind of could funnel through there, funnel down through Romania, what is Bulgaria, through Turkey, to get down to what is through Syria, because there was land the whole way. It doesn't matter, but it's like, there's also the fact somebody's got a really bad echo. There's also just interestingly, Istanbul was, Constantinople was the Eastern Roman Empire. And there was also conflicts between the Western Crusaders as they came in. And the reason for that is because everything's routed right through Istanbul to get there. That's where the land bridge between East and West would connect. So we see the same thing here.
Yeah, so him being liberal at first, and then moving into this what he calls an illiberal democracy, and which is, I mean, like I said, the parallels are just uncanny when you really break them down. To be clear, the first step that we're talking about right now is basically a win big, right? Claims a mandate for unlimited power, for sweeping changes, because this is what the people want. So for Orban, it was the 2010 election. I believe you're right, Jesse, on the way you pronounce the name, but they only won by 53%, right, of a vote. So, I mean, we're talking about barely a majority. And that's just rough numbers. But even like when you look here in the United States, they say, 50 whatever percent of the vote. We're talking about I think under 2 million votes, right? In the United States, I believe it was for Trump.
Just around.
And then also you just look at the amount of the adult populace that even voted, whether they were incarcerated, disenfranchised through criminal convictions. As we've talked about plenty of times, the bootstrap narrative, the rugged individualism, has really just disenfranchised a large majority of the population by itself. And so then he uses this to say, well, voters gave him authority to rebuild Hungary and push through basically anything without much opposition. And so the parallel here, obviously, 2016 election, he loses the popular vote, but he wins the Electoral College and then calls a historic landslide. But the 2024 election, here we are, every swing state, popular vote, Electoral College, and we are watching the absolute destruction, or restructuring rather, of the system through primarily illegal means. But that's how they push it through, is that they go through step 2, rewrite the rules of the game. 2011, Viktor Orban pushed through with only party line votes, basically a new constitution. Opposition parties literally walked out rather than legitimize it. Regardless, cut parliament from 386 to 199 seats, redrew districts to favor Fidesz, rural overrepresented urban opposition pact, but it added registration and technical changes that helped incumbents. It is essentially redistricting and suppressing the vote en masse to where any election that they held going forward presented virtually no opposition, which is what we're watching.
I mean, and it's so frustrating to witness this. And listeners, please, for a second, think about what she's talking about right now. You're witnessing this go on in front of your face. You're witnessing them do this in front of your face. Do not allow it. Do not remain silent, please. I will not. I know nobody on this podcast, no listener of disorderly conduct should be, I would say, silent on this either. It's too important,
Or be aware, right? At least, and these parallels are not coincidental. The people who wrote Project 2025 look at what happened in Hungary. So Hungary is cited often. Trump has spoken his love for Orban, and because of this whole narrative about being a Christian country and stuff like that, there's a strong connection / parallel / whatever the hell you want to call it, affinity for American Christians to feel like, oh, that's also why this is justified, is because we're protecting Christianity. And
Yeah, I want to harp on that a little bit. As someone who is a not proud owner of an X account, when I go on to my X, I intentionally follow right wingers that I disagree with, and they tend to follow further right individuals, and those individuals follow very far right individuals. So if you saw my feed, you would think I was a Hitler sympathizer, gun nut loving. You would just think I'm a super far right. I'm not at all. I want to know what's out there. I want to know what these people are talking about. And the reason why I mention that is because fingers, you're spot on. A lot of them will actually point to Hungary in particular and say, look at their Christian crusade. And they use a lot of verbiage that has to do with the Crusaders, right? We are the final line of defense of the Templars against the Muslim horde, right? And this is the rhetoric, straight up on X, right? I'm not even, I can look at it right now. I'm not even exaggerating. This is how they see themselves. I want to harp on that kind of speech because one of the things that I find very disingenuous when I tend to talk to individuals on the other side of the aisle is they tend to obfuscate or separate rhetoric from policy, as if the two are completely, separate and nothing to do with one another. And the reality of the situation is this is not true at all, right? We know that public rhetoric shapes public opinion and therefore shapes public policy, right? So when we talk about the way Viktor Orban did this and how he was going through his elections, how he shifted from the left to the right, he uses a lot of things that have to do with the nation needing a cultural and spiritual renewal, right? That we need to go back to our roots. This is why it's very fascistic in nature, because one of the things of fascism is this mythologizing of the past, right? We used to be great. This is what we used to be and no longer are, and we're not this way because of these guys, right? And it's interesting the way he mentions that, they're a Christian nation, and he does this separation of, the imposters, the ones who are faking and destroying the country, and the true Hungarians, right? And we see that rhetoric permeate politics in Hungary over the last 2 decades. And with the expounding of such rhetoric, we see elections, we see people unfortunately come out and vote for that kind of thing, right? Regardless of what Bobby said, which is very true though, changing the rules of the election, changing the rules of voting to be obviously more biased towards the Fidesz party, we do still see a lot of people actually vote for it regardless of what the manipulation of the voting system is, right? And those compounding factors obviously will not just lead to him, solidifying power. But the point I'm trying to make is that these things start off small with rhetoric, right? The reason why Hitler was so effective was because he was a great orator, right? He was really good at speeches, and his speeches would get more people to change their opinion and join the party. And so the point I'm trying to make is that individuals like Viktor Orban use rhetoric to their advantage, and that you do it very well, right? Because if there's anything we can count on humans on, it's to divide, right? It's to create division. It's to say me versus you. I'm better. You're not, right? I'm right. You're wrong. I'm good. You're bad, right? And this is classic politician playing into the fears of those in Hungary, causing division, saying that it's the elite in the cities that are taking your money, and the immigrants coming, and the true Christian Hungarians must stand and defend Hungary, or we will be no more. And that rhetoric is very similar to what we see in MAGA.
Even down to
so
what
I wanted to touch on a little bit.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ron.
No, you
So
go.
there's there are steps widely accepted as sort of like part of this playbook, right? But they're not necessarily any one chronological order that they follow. So one of the next steps we were going to talk about is basically controlling the media narrative. And so, between Trump and Orban, and feel free to bring up anybody else that you want to, because I think obviously we recognize the othering that we're talking about, creating a scapegoat, like, taking advantage of economic conditions, creating a scapegoat for whatever problem you can identify, even if it's not really a problem, and using that to control the media narrative. And so that's one of the steps on here that we were going to talk about. Then there's also capturing the courts. All of these things kind of fall in line. Some of them happen simultaneously. Some of them take place just a little bit of time-wise difference. But I think it just varies by nation. Because they have to kind of tailor this a little bit to their specific geography, their specific demographics, etc. So Viktor Orban did exactly the same thing, but by essentially capturing the media, not by banning the media, but by buying it, smearing it. I mean, obviously, we see, again, a lot of that. Piggy, Piggy. You're calling reporters piggy. Like, you've seen this with Trump for years, since the 2016 election. Since he lost in 2020, he spent the next 4 years propagandizing his base and delegitimizing any media or any information that did not come from him and his base. And so I've said this plenty of times before, and I'll say it again, the left was outmatched in capturing the narrative. And we've seen that facilitate the breakdown of the rule of law and the ability for them to rewrite rules in a manner that, in my opinion, is ultimately unconstitutional. And that goes hand in hand with capturing the courts, which we'll touch on next. But please go ahead and weigh on that part if you guys want to, or we could talk about the capture of the courts and both of these.
So,
topics.
The first thing, when you talked about how people on the other side of the aisle will try to separate rhetoric from policy, Jesse, the first thing that jumped into mind is the thing that I will hear when I discuss this with people on TikTok or whatever. That's Trump. Trump exaggerates. Trump, he's always going to say this over the top stuff, but what he really means is, right? That's exactly what you're talking about. Separating the rhetoric, the things he say, and trying to claim, oh, he doesn't actually mean that. And then they'll go on to make a case for exactly what he meant, just using different words, right? The other thing that a personal frustration, and something that I've run into that kind of makes my eyes cross is, you talk about how easily humans are divided into in groups and out groups, right? Like, we're the in group and those out groups, those others, how easily we fall to othering. And y'all have heard my rants about, like, giving up your own humanity to do that, right? But when I have conversations with people and I try to point this out, hey, this is a flaw in human nature, people will come back. And that's exactly why we need to have a country that's only the in group, because humans just cannot handle societies that are diverse. That's why we have to be pure. That's just like, rhetorically, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not sure how to deal with that.
That's so, and I got to be honest with you guys, man, that's so weird to me. That's so effing, and I'm just going to say effing because I have to, right? Weird to me. I would like to know from specifically Jesse. I'm interested. Bobby, I also want to hear you weigh in on this. I mean, how strange is it? I mean, I've been in the other group, right? For those that may be listening, combat diver, Green Beret, also black, right? So there's a lot. Like, if you're familiar, you know that the jokes abound regarding black people and swimming and furthermore diving, right? But no, jokes aside, our ability to other here, and I think one of the things that I pointed out very early on in this campaign was they've othered so many people that they are now a minority.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think a really big part of it is just it's a lack of understanding proper history. I think when these demagogues take power in their countries, Putin with Russia saying that Ukraine is naturally a part of Russia, Viktor Orban saying that we are a Christian nation against the Muslim hordes. I'm sure Erdogan does this kind of rhetoric too, multiple other ones. Trump does it, right? This idea of purification of the state. First off, it's very eugenicsy. Second of all, it's a very disingenuous understanding of history, right? A lot of far right individuals that I'll tend to debate on TikTok will say multiculturalism has failed, right? Liberalism has failed. And this idea that one of the things I've done, taken upon myself as usual, is to read a new book called How the World Made the West, right? And it's by Josephine Quinn, who's a professor, I believe at Harvard, but I could be wrong. I have to double check. but she is a professor that kind of analyzes human history in how it actually is a smushing, if you will, of cultures and societies that have come together, interacted, traded, exchanged technology, communication, forms, written forms, so on and so forth, that have led to the innovations that we see today. And the reason why I mention that is because I can't think of like a singular civilization, if you will, in history that was self-sufficient, because that's not how that works, right? They didn't. That's not how they ever saw it back then, right? The Greeks didn't see themselves as, oh, we're the Greeks and like fuck everybody else. Like that's actually not how they saw it. They said we're the Greeks and we have our buddies, the Egyptians that we do trade with, and those on Crete and Cyprus that we do trade with, and we have these guys we do trade with, but we hate the Persians, right? And there's just this idea that like this idea of a purified state. The reason why these politicians are using it is because it's easy to sell and it causes fear and it gives you power, right? But when you look at history, it's disingenuous. What they're calling for, a purified state, has never actually existed before, right? And anytime they say it has existed, they're misquoting.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you bring that up. I mean, and it's so many things, right? Like we talk about the same thing is true about systems of government, right? we see this persist. Well, communism. Look at all the times that socialism has failed, and nobody really takes the time to investigate what in fact was. Yeah, you said socialism, right? You said communism. Let's do an investigation of what they were actually doing, and then you find out that, oh my God, it's a hybrid, just like everything else. I mean, it's and it's the same thing there. I don't know. That's kind of what it puts me in mind of when I listen to you say what you've said there, Jess.
I think just evolution alone points to that, right? I mean, there are scientific parameters of what a species is. Humans, quite literally, can we track back to nothing but an amalgamation of the previous iterations, in communities and geographic areas. So it's just really, it's not even supported by that. It's just, it is amazing the role that religion plays here, right? It has nothing to do, really, well, for the most part, with genetics or physiological traits or phenotypic expression. Any of that. So it's really the entire thing. I think that's one reason why World War II has always fascinated me. And any of these things is the psychology required. Anybody who's ever led people knows that you have to lead people, and it's worse than herding cats, which is what that sometimes I laugh at some of the conspiracies that people come up with, like there's some global cabal, and like you think that somebody was effective enough to herd every doctor and scientist, in the world and along with other experts. But yeah, so as far as controlling the narrative for media, well, Ron, did you want to jump in on anything?
There's like so many strings that have been laid down.
Well, go ahead and take your time, get in whatever you want. Because I think there's
on diversity, to your point, Jesse. So a few things. I'm going to try to connect these dots. People are susceptible to these narratives because, as you say, Jesse, they don't actually know history, right? They know the Cliff's Notes of history. They might know the high points. They know general facts. And so when somebody comes along and provides them a narrative that connects those dots, but is actually a lie, or omits entire parts of the story that would give you a different takeaway, they're vulnerable to that because, oh, that's right, we did come to this country. Oh, that's right, we did conquer the West. Right, that's right, we did have farmers in the West that were self-supporting and all they needed was the government to be out of their way. Except no, the West was heavily subsidized. Look up the Homestead Act, which was giving people real estate. Look at how small farmers contended against big wealthy ranchers. No, power, capital always was oppressing the working class, even back then, even in the West. But because people don't know that, they fall to this narrative. And then it becomes kind of locked in. Their understanding of history is this false narrative, right? And so the same thing, if you're in Hungary, you know that the Crusades were a thing and that they happened. And also remember, that's right next to Yugoslavia, which tore itself apart in the 90s, largely along religious and ethnic lines, like the Muslim communities against Christian communities. And part of the problem there was they literally had centuries of going and killing each other. So that's one thing. The other thing is, to your point, Bobby, genetic diversity is required for a given population of humans to survive. Small populations that are isolated in mountain areas or through geography or whatever throughout history have died out because they can't maintain enough genetic diversity. And then whatever genetic flaws there may be in that community as people interbreed become more and more exaggerated, right? There was this thing in Europe over a couple of centuries. The Habsburgs were a ruling dynasty. And of course, the ruling class of all these countries intermarried to maintain power and to make alliances and stuff. And there came to be this thing called the Habsburg chin, which meant that these people were so inbred because they'd only bred with each other for a couple of centuries that this chin became more and more pronounced to a point where it was the Habsburg chin, which is a demonstration of the flaws of a lack of diversity. Lastly, I'll connect the dots in terms of, if you look at empires throughout history, the most successful empires throughout history embraced diversity. The Roman Empire embraced diversity. They didn't, they used people that were intelligent from throughout wherever they found them in their empire, and they brought them in. They gave them power, they gave them influence, and that made the Roman Empire stronger. Same thing happened when the Mongols came along. The Mongols came along, wiped everybody out, but when they found somebody that was smart, had a new idea or whatever, that made them stronger. The reason we have the Enlightenment, or the Renaissance, I should say, the reason the Renaissance happened was in large part due to the Moorish invasion of Spain and the Arabic world bumping up against the European world again, and knowledge being transferred, and knowledge that had been lost in Western Europe. The whole reason why the Renaissance people and the Enlightenment guys suddenly were all into the classical Greeks was because all of these texts have been retained in the Arabic world, but destroyed in the West.
Amen.
And they were rediscovering their own history and putting their own spin on it. And now, a couple of centuries, like half a millennium later, suddenly you have idiots saying the West has always been the leader because, going all the way back to the Greeks. And it's like, if you know history, you're like, you wouldn't even fucking know that if not for the Arabs. And one last point I'll make. It's called algebra for a fucking reason.
Algebra. So I have to jump in because I absolutely love this, right?
Yeah,
Ron,
and I love it too. And I'm sorry, Jesse. I've got to jump in front of you. I got to let the listeners know that I've spent at least 5 years in person in the Middle East. I speak Arabic. I love you guys. I'm sorry, Jess. Go ahead.
No, I think Figures is just spot on. Yeah, so I'm reading this book is really blowing my mind because it actually affirms the idea that Greeks actually saw themselves as not even like a part of Europe, but closely tied to the East, which is very interesting, right? And we see this Christianization of Greek happen centuries after, right? And Greek democracy was very short-lived. It only existed for, I think, like 200 years or so. So it's interesting because when you look at Greek records, they saw themselves as a part in this larger Mediterranean world where they were trading information and technology with the East in particular. I just bought a book called Silk Roads. I forgot the author's name. But the main argument, I can't wait to read the book. The main argument is that the majority of civilization and the advancements in technology actually traveled east from India and China west to Europe, right? Which is so interesting when you really think about it.
Yeah.
And it breaks down this idea that multiculturalism doesn't work, which obviously going back to the authoritarians that we're talking about today do not understand what they are talking about. And the last point I want to make, I could talk about this for hours, but the last point I want to make is, if anything, we see that societies in isolation almost never advance, right? This is why we still find tribes in the Amazon, and they're still living in the Stone Age. This is why we have individuals that are still like, I don't want to say in particular, but like they're still in the steppes or over in like Mongolia kind of thing in the mountains, where you still find tribes that are still there, still thriving, but still very much traditional in their regards kind of thing, with not much advancements in language, technology, science, math, so on and so forth. Not a bad thing per se, right? It's not to say that they're way behind, but rather to say that when we talk about the superiority of the West, it is a false image. It is a pattern that is imposed by a disingenuous read of history.
That's great. I think that's a fantastic way to say it. And we're finding ourselves face to face with these types of things often. The narrative rewrite of history, that is so wild, right? And like you can look at, and one of the things that and Jesse, I know you're gonna have something to say about this, and Fingers, you too. One of the big things that I noticed, right, is we when we look at history, it's like these big events, right? It's Midway, it's this, it's that, right? It's somebody climbing Mount Everest for the first time, right? But it's the details where you learn, right? It's the details in which you learn. So when we talk about Midway, why was it so significant? How did they figure it out, right? What did it mean, right? Because, we hear about these things and, we know what way it went. But when you really dig into the details, dear friend, right, it kind of shows you how close you came. And it's the same thing here. So when we talk about, right, how Orban took power, right, how he enabled himself, we also must, I think the parallel that we are trying to make, it's lost on you readers, if you haven't figured it out by now, you should probably turn this off. I'm not talking to you. You're too dumb, right? That's big facts. Okay. But if you are still listening, the fact of the matter is there are big parallels right now to what we're seeing here in our own country. Let's talk about some of those points. Tell me what you guys think about that.
I'd like to get Bobby into the conversation because it's been a sausage party.
Actually, like I said, I wanted to do this one because I think it's important, and I knew that everybody would have a lot of really great contributions here. So one of the next steps is capture the courts, which again, I mean, the parallels can be drawn, right, on all of them so significantly. But actually, before we move to media, I just wanted to point out about what Orban did, which was essentially he basically only gave state media attention to loyal outlets, right? He had all his friends buy various outlets and make conglomerates out of them. And I mean, literally, when I watched Viktor Orban did this, you could just like replace the names. It's amazing to me. But yeah, as far as the media goes, just to wrap that one up, his allies bought major media outlets, merged them into like a pro-government foundation, right? And then you see Trump trying to do that already. Right? I can't remember who they restricted the news pool to, like everybody but one outlet. One of y'all might know more about that one recently.
So much of the press pool has been replaced with influencers and people with no training in actual journalism and sycophants.
Right. Now, one thing that I want to point out about what Trump has done is using agencies to sort of try to align the message to a pro-Trump regime message, and use agency pressure, regulatory pressure to, I mean, we've seen it with multiple late night TV hosts, where they're essentially, looking to pull licenses from media outlets that are not passing on a pro-regime message, which, as we all know here, is, just a blatant violation of the First Amendment. But so I guess we all know, and we could come back to these things because I think the parallels are just going to pop up, and they're so intertwined. It's really hard to, sort of deduce these down into the clear steps. Because they're really just a lot, they're commingled a lot, but I wanted to give as much as we could a basic framework for people to draw on. But yeah, so capturing the courts, right? I mean, man, the Supreme Court just agreed to take up the birthright citizenship case.
Yeah,
I was going to save that for an episode of its own. Yeah, because I think there was no circuit splits, right? This is clearly settled law.
Yeah.
But here you have a stacked Supreme Court. Stacked, by the way, because Congress would not hold a vote on Democratic nominees. So
thank you, Mitch McConnell.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And if you're just tuning in, all right, let's just a little recap on that. Mitch McConnell refused to hold a vote, prevented, right, under the auspice of the fact that, this president's outgoing, he shouldn't make this selection. And he didn't make it. And this is for the younger generation. And that, I think, was it Merrick Garland that was it was under consideration, right? And they refused to hold that hearing. Merrick Garland was cheated out of that seat. And then we had, the Republican Party do the very, very same thing, right? Which, not saying that they don't have the right to, right? But we're definitely gonna highlight the hypocrisy. Right. And we're definitely going to highlight the fact that, and I'm going to say this out loud, and I'm going to sit back and I'm not going to look the camera intensely in the eye. Right. But I am going to say, motherfucker, that if you're told, you're hired in Congress, right? In the Senate in particular, okay? Your job is to hold fucking confirmation hearings, okay? You don't get to decide we're not doing this one because XYZ. There's
But
nothing,
y'all just
there's nothing
gaze out the
about that
window,
shit in the fucking
as you
regs.
said.
Get your shit together, Mitch, and everyone
And
else.
also, this is not history. Mike Johnson just did the same fucking thing
Exactly.
by holding Grijalva and refusing to seat Grijalva for whatever, was it like 2 months? And then see that there's a new GOP rep and that guy got seated within 3 days.
Amazing. Right. And the thing is, man, just do your, for me, who knows how I vote, right? You guys know this about me, right? I'm a little bit of a wild man when it comes to voting. Okay. But do your fucking job. I'll say that. Do your fucking job. You will never get my vote if you don't, at a minimum, do that. You may not like the outcome of doing your job today, right? But you do it. You fucking do it, right? You confirm people when they're voted in by the people. You do your fucking job. I don't know. Have I said enough times? What do you think?
Probably.
All right. Sorry.
So, and just for the listener, just to spin off of that very quickly, in terms of what Joey was mentioning, for those of us that think this is just some crazy liberal echo chamber, they should understand that this panel is only 75% composed of Harris voters.
Just throw them under the bus. Honestly.
Hey, man. You know what? I'll fucking own it. I'll fucking own it. It's you know.
One thing I thought was interesting in Hungary, he lowered the judicial retirement age from 70 to 62 to force out hundreds of judges in one move. Expanded the Constitutional Court and filled it with his own Supreme Court, Constitutional Court justices, right? And then created new administrative courts, later modified under EU pressure with strong executive influence. So right now, the Constitution, actually, I don't want to say thank God, but it lays out, how or why Supreme Court justices are, could be removed. Otherwise, they hold a position for life. And it gives the legislative branch, authority over other Article 3 courts. And you've seen right-wing legislators in our country try to neuter Article 3 courts to support executive power. And you've also seen him replacing administrative court judges, in particular immigration judges, with his picks. They absolutely have been they've removed judges from the bench, like sitting in robe at court in immigration hearings, in the middle of calendars, and removed them, right? And then they're replacing them with military judges, basically, with people from the military who they, I guess, identify as loyalists, who do not have the same history of being defensive of, asylum claims, or I guess I want to say defensive of, or doing their job and being a neutral arbiter of asylum claims. And so even recently, and we can touch on this, it's a little bit off topic, but immigration attorneys across the country have recently noticed a shift in the immigration proceedings where they have en masse tried to terminate asylum claims before they're heard on the merits in the last week or so, and then immediately rendering people to deportation proceedings. So a lot to unpack there. But in today's parallels, we've seen Donald Trump appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, as we just discussed, publicly pressured the DOJ and the FBI to basically behave as his personal, legal arm, personal enforcement. And literally, the news with Haba, that was his personal attorney who he's tried to illegally appoint to an AG positions. I think this is, when you're talking about how you break democracy from the inside, capture the courts, I feel like is a significant step because it is what legitimizes the behavior within the legal framework.
If I could add on top of that, if democracy was the Titanic and authoritarians were the iceberg, capturing the course would be the part in the movie where the Titanic splits in two, where it is beyond gone, right? And the reason why is, there's several reasons why. If we cannot trust the legal system to be impartial, then it can be used as a weapon. Right. It can be used as a weapon for the powerful against political opponents, against the poor, against the needy, against those who do not have power. It delegitimizes literally everything. And it causes a complete and total lack of trust in anyone that could potentially use that system to prosecute legitimate opponents and legitimate criminals. It is, I would argue, it's really hard to come back from that when you have a legal system that does that. In capturing the courts, it looks different. I think it's really important to mention that The characteristics that have been used throughout the 20th and 21st century, while they are consistent, manifest themselves in different ways. They don't look exactly the same, right? Like Viktor Orban taking over the media may not look like the same way perhaps maybe Trump is doing it, but similarities are there nonetheless, right? And when I think about capturing the courts in particular, in my mind, when I think about the legal system, I don't just think about the Supreme Court, which is super valid, and you guys are obviously spot on. I think also about the DOJ and the FBI, right? Like the Lindsay Halligan case, the 2 grand jury indictments against James Comey and Letitia James, which were thrown out by the judge because it was
Kudos.
absolutely incredible. Like, what a joke she is. I'm waiting for her to be disbarred because, like, talk about prosecutorial misconduct is just insane to me, right? But this is the consistent pattern of this type of administration. I actually looked up, by the way, if this has ever happened before, and apparently it has happened before under Trump's first term. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. So I was like, gotcha, that makes sense.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Same.
Immediately it was like, oh, under who? And you're like,
Under
Trump
Trump's
first term. And I
first
was
term.
like, hand me the first half.
And so when you have the legal system being used as a weapon, clearly being used as a political weapon, not accused of. A lot of people like to accuse the Joe Biden administration of like weaponizing this stuff, even though there's so much evidence to suggest that he didn't. That the Biden administration actually took extra caution to not get involved in these types of litigation. It's just, it is a huge, you know what? It's not even a red flag. It is a snapping of the Titanic when we see the administration doing this kind of stuff.
A couple of
So
things.
to tie it back to capturing the media real quick, they spent so long, every accusation was a projection. And you see it working in magnificent manner across the country. It's really disturbing. Go ahead, fingers.
Yeah, I mean, and that, right, that's a confession, right? So, oh, Biden weaponized the DOJ because that's what we would do, right? That's the mindset that of course he did. Of course criminal prosecutions don't happen because there's actually a crime committed. Of course it's only persecuting one's political opponents. I want to very quickly touch on this decision about hearing birthright citizenship, because my dad mentioned it the other day. I don't know a lot about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bobby, but like as an armchair, like thinks he understands some portion of the government and the law, the 14th Amendment is an amendment. It is the Constitution, right? Nobody has standing to say that amendment should not exist, right? And at issue here is not whether people are citizens. At issue here is whether the president has the power through executive order to disregard the Constitution. That is what
So
it
let me
seems
just,
a legal question.
yeah. So here's the thing, right? So the courts and the Supreme Court in particular do not generally arbiter political questions. And they certainly cannot strike down an entire amendment of the Constitution because their authority stops there. You know what I mean? They can say what is constitutional as far as legislative, legislation, but they cannot say the 14th. I mean, the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional. Like, you know what I mean? But so what they've done here is, in a way, genius. Honestly, they have really pinpointed the very singular phrase of within the jurisdiction of, right, or subject to the jurisdiction of. Sorry, subject to the jurisdiction of, and they have taken a look at the case law on this. One of the most influential decisions being Wong Kim Ark, and said, well, they basically framed it in a way. They framed the challenge in a way that allows the court, should they be so inclined, to distinguish the current case from Wong Kim Ark. That's saying, well, this particular question wasn't answered there. And I mean, really, that's probably the only way they could have done it, because overruling the case law on this is going to be, if the Supreme Court has any legitimacy left, that's a big if, that would just absolutely obliterate anything left. And the only way the Supreme Court works is through being a legitimately neutral branch of government. That's what gives it the power to be the arbiter of disputes between the other branches and the people.
And if I may point out, right, and for you guys listening, I did have the opportunity to sit with Bobby in a call with Professor Eric Siegel, who, recently announced that he's going to be working on the Center for Constitutional Law.
Georgia State
University.
Yeah.
They've tapped him essentially to take that over, and he's accepted that offer. So, and I just want to point
Look
out,
for announcements on that coming soon.
yeah, absolutely. And we're certainly, and by the way, figures, this is the least appropriate time to bring this up for you, but he's trying to get a hold of you.
I already talked to
Because,
Sam about that.
okay, all right, just want to make sure, like, you know,
Well, yeah,
no,
I mean, so the long and short of it is that you know, birthright citizenship stems from beyond the creation of the United States. They would get it from British common law. It was widely accepted that it did not, you know, there was never ever an implication of where your parents were from, or even the idea of citizenship, as I'm sure Jesse could touch on. The idea of citizenship as we have it today was just non-existent back then. Birthright citizenship was widely accepted as just the way things were, right? For white people. But it was by state back then, not, you know, by like a federal proclamation or what have you. So, and I think I'm gonna let Jesse run with this, but a lot of people argue that this was just meant to remedy the Dred Scott decision and be applicable to the descendants of slaves. But the reality is, and if you read Wonka Mark in its entirety, which I think is like 63 pages or something, but you should read it. It is so far beyond that it was really just laying the consistency of what was already accepted. I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure Jesse has something to say.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. You made a really good point. You said, you know, the concept of citizenship wasn't really like the way we understand it today. It didn't really exist, and that's like spot on, right? Like there was debate as to what citizenship even like really meant, right? Like we knew that, you know, by the signing of the Constitution, that citizenship at least invoked a sense of the right to vote. I mean, that's not necessarily true today, considering that we have citizens in territories that can't vote for a president, right? So what does citizenship mean has always been kind of fluctuating throughout American history. You're also spot on with saying that, you know, to say the 14th Amendment was just to kind of overturn the Dred Scott case and only apply to African Americans is also disingenuous. And the best source for that is the writer of the 14th Amendment himself, John Bingham, who wrote like multiple letters in Congress on record and to his colleagues and peers about what he intended when he wrote the 14th Amendment, as well as all the, you know, the several other members of Congress that helped him write the careful, crafted wording of at least the first section of the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, over 100 proposals for the 14th Amendment were proposed in Congress before the signing of the 14th Amendment. So we can imagine the specificity of language that was used in order to really define federally what citizenship meant in this regard, kind of thing. And it was not just for newly freed slaves. But anyway, to kind of tie it back, seeing the way the Trump administration is seeking to use and weaponize the legal system to get the outcome that he desires, regardless of its historical accuracy, is very alarming, right? Because he's, like you're saying, he's trying to say, oh, like it should only be like, legal parents, so on and so forth. The irony to this is twofold. One, you're 100% right as well, Bobby, that we receive the foundation of when we say the jurisdiction thereof from English common law. That anyone that was subject to the jurisdiction of the king would be within his territory, right? Whether you were foreign or not,
Born in the kingdom,
right? Born in the kingdom or a foreigner in the kingdom, you were still subject to the king's law, right? And this just naturally proceeded into American law. And I don't know, I think the way the administration is, again, misinterpreting history and using the legal system to manipulate it in order to get a desired outcome is indicative of their authoritarian behavior.
The thing
absolutely.
that jumps, I mean, and again, you're the legal expert, Bobby, but like them trying to use this subject to the jurisdiction it seems to me like, do y'all really want to go down this road? Because if that's the case, if we're
So you
going
can't arrest
to
me for DUI
if we're
or
going to
anything
say that like
possession.
illegal immigrants and all of these things, that they can't be citizens because they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S., then they cannot have committed a crime by crossing a border because they're not subject to U.S. law.
Any other
They
crime?
can go down the street and
Any crime.
unallow anybody that they want to kill because they're not subject to the jurisdiction. Like, this makes no sense to me. Obviously, smarter people than me have looked at this and they've figured out a way to thread that needle, but it's just rhetorically and
But
talking
they're
to
not
other
threatening
people.
well.
Yeah.
they're not threatened at will, because you see the exceptions being children of diplomats, people who are subject to diplomatic immunity, who literally cannot be prosecuted by common authorities.
That's crazy. But I mean, you know what it is though? It points to what you're talking about, right? They're doing this because their assumption is we have captured SCOTUS. And all we need here is a rubber stamp, not a true like deliberation on the facts, and not an actual legal framework that is like actually has integrity and actually holds up under rigorous intellectual scrutiny. The assumption is, yeah, we can just say this and we're going to get SCOTUS to rubber stamp it. And then we can go and pretend like we have legal authority because SCOTUS has rubber stamped this, when in fact the underpinnings and the argument underneath it would not hold a 5-ounce kid's toy.
And that's why it's so important what you know, as Jesse characterized it, as it's snapping in two, because that's quite literally what it is, right? I knew this was coming, but it just doesn't stop me from saying he can't do that. And then he does it. And that's every time. And the capture of the courts is what legitimizes that narrative, and where it really allows them to fracture our democratic safeguards from within without very little opposition. But what this is essentially an attempt to eliminate or rewrite the 14th Amendment without doing it through the two different processes for amending our Constitution. It is devoid of all historical context and honesty. It is devoid of every character integrity. It is full of racism and bigotry, but ultimately it is all, meant to encourage groupthink and the othering of a demographic that will allow him to consistently consolidate executive power and tear apart democratic safeguards even further. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on that before we move on. I think we have so I have about 6 steps illuminated here, but however, I think we all know there's a lot more nuance than that we probably won't fit into one episode, but I'll just give you a preview. The next 2 are going to be building a loyal economy, which we've seen. I mean, and then attacking civil society and watchdogs, all of which are just so blatantly transparent in what's going on today. So if you guys wants to finish up on courts, we can talk about these other 2 steps.
I guess the last thing I'd want to say on the court thing is when you manipulate the legal system like that, the court system, how do I say this? You muddy the waters as to what is legitimate, right? And I think it's so dangerous. You create a legal facade, right? We're saying, hey, it's legal, right? It's just like, okay, but like it was clearly a violation of the spirit of the law, clearly a violation of what should be just, right? Because the objective of a court is to as best it can weigh the evidence in order to have a just outcome. Right. Obviously, it's not perfect. Obviously, the legal system, well before anyone like Trump ever touched the office, wasn't perfect. We know this, right? But I think what we're seeing is a new class of assault on the legal system, on the courts, on the DOJ, on the FBI, that delegitimizes all, that rewrites the rules and says, this is now legal. And because it's legal, it's permissible. And I think that's a very dangerous road to go down.
Something that occurs to me is Kafka. Franz Kafka, if you're familiar with who Franz Kafka was. He's a novelist. I believe he was Czech, might have been Polish, but Eastern European, and wrote several like novels and short stories that were all generally dystopic in the context of humans caught up in the gears of an impersonal bureaucracy, right? And the one that occurs to me is his short story called The Trial. And it's about somebody who's been snatched up and they're going through a trial, and throughout they're saying, what am I charged with? What is happening? Why am I even being brought here? I can't defend myself if I don't even know what I'm being charged with. And every step, the authorities in the state is just disregarding him, not answering his question, just moving him through the process towards imprisonment. That seemed extreme when I first heard about it when I was in my teens. We have immigration courts in this country where 4-year-old kids are being asked to represent themselves. And you have judges with a straight face talking to 4-year-old children saying, do you understand these rights as I've laid them out to you? Do you understand what you're being accused of? Do you understand the legal principles? And love, these children, their parents aren't even allowed to be there. They don't have representation, and they're being asked to understand what's going on. Tell me how that is tangibly different from Kafka's short story.
Yep.
If I can just say it isn't, and I'm going to tell you something, man. For those that don't know me, I know that people on this podcast do, but I have a very, very soft spot when it comes to children, and that for me is where I will 100% and utterly take the fight to the enemy. Right? Like there's absolutely no way you get away with this. It was the same, and I don't want to get off on a tangent. I won't. But like in Afghanistan, right? And if you guys, if you know, the way they treated some of those young people there and the way they used those young people there in their little tri-circles, right? What I'll say is all of these things, when it comes to things like that, it all echoes the same thing, right? So the way we're treating kids in immigration court, the way that we tolerated children being treated in Afghanistan. For me, this is a very particular line that I will never cross. And that is to say that I'm going to go hard in the paint against anything that hurts kids the way that these policies, the way that these practices have and do. It is unacceptable.
We have children being zip tied in these raids.
Yep.
We have, and then we saw nationally, we see people being fined with SNAP benefits being taken away and children being allowed to starve. And that is a measure, that is to me a measure of how far people who support these things have allowed themselves to be dehumanized. This is how bad it is, how much of your own humanity you have given away. If you're somebody that is in favor of what ICE is doing, of what this administration is doing, you have been under attack and you are succumbing to the attack. You are being asked to give up your own humanity and you're doing it. And when you choose to see, well, those aren't my kids. Those are just kids. Those are just illegals. They shouldn't be here. Their parents shouldn't have brought them here. Their parents shouldn't have made that choice. You are giving up your own fucking humanity. And that's not good for any of us. And it's especially not good for you.
I just got to chip in our weekly reminder of On Freedom that's constantly mentioned. That's part of the book, right? Is the solidarity, the idea that what is permissible for one will be permissible for the next.
Yes.
In due time, right? What affects one individual will affect the other, right? Because again, we all have these inalienable rights, right? By the laws of nature and nature's God, that we all have the ability to have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of mobility, so on and so forth. And when it's impeded on one group of individuals for whatever criteria they meet, that criteria can be changed to include you. Right?
Can I just ask the question, right? Because thank you very much, Jesse. Can I just ask the question? How many episodes in a row do you guys think it's going to take us bringing up On Freedom to get Tim Snyder to come on the show?
Hey, let's reach out.
I think that I have a few episodes that are we're probably going to shoot in the near future that will really lend legitimacy to some good arguments for Tim to come on. We'll talk about that afterwards.
Awesome.
No, like literally, I think that would be, I don't know, just, yeah, you say feather in the cap, right? But like just such a huge thing. And I know for me personally, how that changed my outlook on life, right?
Just fangirl out, huh?
Yeah. Oh, dude, just 100%. Mr. Snyder, can I get you some water? He's like, hey, I'm in the GTA, bro. Where are you? And I'm like, okay, I'm a little far to get you water.
So this probably would have been a good one if we could ever get him to come on here, because at the end I have a recap for how we sort of deal with this thing, and really I think you could just really track all the chapters of On Tyranny, right, for how we fight what's happening here. I think we could just, for the sake of time, we could probably just smash the last two into each other, because I think the attack on the courts, the attack on rights, it rolls right into the attack on civil society and watchdogs, because you cannot, de-intellectualify, for lack of better words, because that's not one, what's happening right in the courts, right? You can't just proffer this alternate version of history and law and just cut it all up into bits and pieces that never were aligned in the same order to begin with. But without attacking academics, without attacking watchdogs, without attacking lawyers, which, by the way, shout out to the lower courts and lawyers out here fighting the good fight. Hold the line. Don't give up the ship. But we saw the same thing in Hungary, They targeted universities. Honestly, George Soros seems to be a name that's used over there too to attack various things. But they labeled independent NGOs, especially those who help migrants, as like foreign agents or enemies of the state, which you see happening here. I mean, nonprofits are under attack, especially those meant to give pro bono legal aid to migrants. And you have Trump fired multiple inspector generals, retaliate against whistleblowers, smear election workers. Put literally. I mean, you attacked Harvard, home of Harvard law. Wild work. That's too big for your britches, maybe. But I'll go ahead and let you guys chime in on that. The second one is the last one, I'm sorry, that we have for today is build a loyal economy, which crony capitalism as governments. I mean, my God, it's just all on the open at this point. So
I think one thing that pops up in my head when we talk about, I guess where we're at, right? Well, the idea of, sorry, I'm blanking now. What was the point that you made before the loyalist economy? What's the
about attacking academics,
Thank
whistleblowers.
you. Yes, thank you. Like institutions, right? I think that starts in the very beginning, right? Viktor Orban has done this, Erdogan has done this, Putin has done this, Lukashenko has done this, Trump has done this, where in the beginning, when you start your messaging, one of the core tenets that you must do is you have to sow distrust in the institutions before you attack them. You have to say you can't trust X, whatever it may be. Insert object here, right? Say again?
Fake news.
Fake news, right? You can't trust the liberal woke academic universities, right? You can't trust the scientists that are bought by George Soros. You can't
the
trust
commies.
You can't trust the commies. You can't trust the courts anymore because the courts are all liberal activists, right? You must sow distrust. And if you, in your original message, along with where a homogenous Christian nation that must return to his roots, if you can sow distrust in every other institution, your work is done for you, right? By the time you start attacking them, you won't need public support, right? You just need public distrust. Enough public distrust is enough support to attack the institutions without much pushback from the public, which is ironic because they're inevitably supporting the downfall of their own civil liberties.
There's two things occur to
CDC?
me.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so two things. I mean, first of all, you talk about how the courts are broken, right? And if, watch guards, civil safeguards, whatever you care to call them, if the courts are broken, the mechanisms by which watchdogs hold the administration accountable are gone. Because so much of what happens is through suits filed in court to say, actually, you can't do that. And if the courts are broken, well, that's taken away, right? The other thing that occurred to me, because of course I'm a skeptic and I think about science, right? And it's just like something that suddenly snapped into focus for me when you were talking, Jess, is about the attacks on science. Well, it's partly anti-intellectualism, right? But authoritarians cannot abide any source of intellectual authority outside themselves, which means you cannot even allow for science says this, we can prove this, the evidence says. No. The evidence says whatever the authoritarian says. Truth is whatever the authoritarian says. It doesn't matter if we have thousands and thousands and thousands of studies demonstrating that there is no link between vaccination and autism. If the administration has decided otherwise, they're going to change the CDC website and they're going to stop requiring Hep C or Hep B vaccination for babies because they have decided that vaccines cause autism. The science be damned. And what's more important is that the regime has authority, not science has authority. There can be no source of authority outside of the regime for authoritarians.
Yeah. That's the Hep B thing is just mind blowing. I literally watching doctors tell people on TV, do not listen to this guidance. Rely on your own physician. But until we get through this, and to Jesse, to your point, what's I think so effective about Trump's second term is the 4 years in between where he just propagandized his base over and over again to the point that this was already sown before he took office. And that's why we've seen so much damage in such a short term.
Oklahoma State textbooks are now teaching that the 2020 election was stolen.
Yep.
Even though
it's insane.
All of the court cases demonstrated over and over there is zero evidence to support this idea. Every time they got into a room where they had to prove it with evidence, they got kicked out. But in the court of public opinion, if you say something enough times, some people will believe it. So much so that kids in Oklahoma
Are now
that are
being
not
taught
yet
that.
born are going to be taught this.
If you
Yeah.
repeat a lie often enough, it becomes politics.
Right. When you were talking and you were saying to delegitimize every other source of authority and consolidate the primary authority into one figure, right? That's essentially what's happening. You were saying that, and the first thing that came to mind was cults. It's exactly what cults do. Cults say, and as someone who grew up in a cult, very, very familiar with the idea of saying, everyone's lying, you must rely on this source.
Wait.
So
Yeah,
50% of this
exactly.
panel grew up in a cult?
You also grew up in a cult?
I'm like, wait, what? Like, okay, we need to know your
Well,
backstory.
My
that's the
man.
next episode, y'all.
My man, we
Come back next time.
yeah. Hey Jesse, we got to
So here
talk
are
about that. But
The weird coinky dink that we just
You know
discovered.
what would be a really good episode, actually, come to think about it? A really good episode would be one on straight up Christian fundamentalism, like the Christianity and how it's played its role in America. We can obviously tell our personal stories. I have a very tumultuous history with when it comes to religion and Christianity that we could absolutely go over.
brother, this might be, and jokes aside, people always like you should write a fucking book, right? And like, there's a couple of things about that. One, I don't want to put my name on the shit I've done, and two,
Y'all got next.
like nobody'd fucking believe it. I mean, I've talked to her extensively enough. I'm sorry for the audience. Her being Bobby, the co-founder of Money Out of Politics. We've had extensive conversations. Fingers, you and I have too. Jesse, you and I have too as well. Look, nobody believed it, but I'm so interested in having that conversation with you, Jesse. I mean, when I talk to you, I mean, people when they start really digging into and hearing about like Scientology, I'm like, my
Well,
poor
let's save
sweet
that for y'all's
summer
episode
bitch.
next week
Yeah,
and wrap this one up because we're running out of time, guys. Sorry. So yeah, I mean, I think the CDC, Harvard, Columbia, and it didn't even start with Harvard and Columbia. They broke some universities in Florida in a very strategic fashion that I won't go dive too far into, but it's a common pattern. And to anybody listening, this really started a long time ago. And if you watch Heather Cox Richardson's one of her latest conversations, she talks about how this is the end game of 50 years of strategy of right-wing conservative politicians, billionaires, think tanks, etc. So I actually want to tell you guys about some interesting advertisements I saw recently too, but I'll tell you about that later. The last part, the thing that we're going to talk about is building a loyal economy, which is crony capitalism, which, I mean, all of his pardons nearly, right, were either political violence for him or crony capitalism, like fraud, not perjury, bribery, white collar, get your money ass crimes. And I just think the pattern there is so crazy. Orban did similar things, massive state contracts to companies owned by political allies. One of his childhood friends, computers died. One of his childhood friends basically became one of the richest men in the country off of state deals. Public resources and funds were channeled through politically connected networks. I mean, it's, we could talk. I think everybody here could probably bring up an example from Trump.
Okay, question for you. How do you guys feel about the Henry Killar pardon? Since we're talking pardons and we're in this particular week, representative from Texas, Henry Killar, got pardoned by President Trump, Democrat, notably. What are your thoughts?
I just want to mention to the
follows
audience
the same
too,
pattern.
If anyone's not familiar with Liz Oyer, I highly recommend looking up Liz Oyer on TikTok or YouTube or wherever. I tend not to be like, oh, check out this source. Look at this YouTube video. I really hate when people say that. But the reason why I say that is because that's where you can find her. She is a former federal federal worker who was the pardons attorney. So she knows what she's talking about. She would help the administrations find whether or not it was legal or worth it to pardon an individual and what the legality of that would be, right? So this is literally her job and expertise. So sounds like a very reliable source. She has her own Substack where she's keeping her own personal record of all of the pardons that Trump is doing and how much money and restitutions are not being paid back, which is just, her latest estimate was 1.6 billion. But with the forgiveness of the Binance guy, I think it doubled.
Just another example, right, of the wealth being transferred upwards in this country in a K economy just really devastating the American people.
And I do definitely want to get back to that, Fingers. I know you brought that up, right? But that was part of what the Mayhem method was talking about, upward transfer of wealth. And I think we've got to get back to that, maybe bring it back to the show as well.
Yeah. You know, the thing that occurs to me, just connecting the dots, and partly because this is a big name and that people should be aware of, is fucking Apple, right? If you're Apple and you import billions of dollars worth of products from overseas, all of your fancy electronics are made in China, folks. And I'm a fan of Apple products. I'm just not a fan of the company. So there's some hypocrisy here on my part. I'll go genuflect and say my Hail Marys later. But if you're Apple, you can go to the White House and give Trump a gold phone and get exemptions from tariffs. But if you run a small business in a small town that imports products from China to sell them to your community, and you get them from China because you get them cheaper there than you can in the US, you don't have access or the resources to make that bribe to get exemptions for the tariffs for yourselves. And so that is a literal mechanism by which big, powerful, wealthy corporations and individuals are able to secure advantages for themselves that are not accruing to the working class and even small entrepreneurs, because of course people like to talk all the time about entrepreneurship and people creating jobs. That's true at a very small level in local communities, people creating small businesses and trying to do something for their community. But by the time you start to like be a larger corporation, you know, they need the labor more than the labor needs them. And they're generating a net negative. Bezos, Amazon, like, you know, people, he built this big human, but think about how many people he employs. Yeah, except you're not counting the number of jobs he wiped out, the number of small businesses he wiped out. Because why would you even go to a hardware store in your town anymore when you could just get it on Amazon Prime next day? And meanwhile, the people that he does employ are being treated like robots. They're like, their bathroom breaks are timed. People like are suffering from mental health issues because of the pace of the work, and they're not allowed any kind of breaks. So obviously, like, I'm triggered, falls right into my narrative about how corporate America and corporations and corporatocracy in general just grinds human beings beneath the gears.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, I think, you know, obviously that's something near and dear to my heart. Also, the co-founder of Money Out of Politics, and just really being, you know, honed in. I started to do an episode on Money Out of Politics, not the organization, but the history, the case law, which I'm sure we'll do one day. It's kind of funny how it is finally the dominant narrative in a lot of organizing circles, which I think is helpful. But I think we've got to work on fleshing out and demonstrating the education that needs to happen, you know, for our populace to really connect the dots on how it's affecting their lives, to you know, sort of encourage people to take a stand against that part and not just see this as politics as usual, because in a way it is, right? But it's the culmination of the backsliding of American democracy and the legitimizing the narrative of this corporate capture of our government as what politics as usual means. And that's just not the case. It shouldn't be anyway. I think the Supreme Court has a huge role to play in that, which we'll discuss one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all of his pardons and commutations have been to loyalists, primarily either committed violence for him or supported by right-wing extremist circles, or committed white-collar crimes that transferred wealth upwards. Also, I mean, the ballroom, I mean, come on. I mean, we're watching actual bribery. You know, I think recently JP Morgan Chase, one of their executives, you know, came out and said that they didn't donate because they didn't want to be investigated for bribery later.
Yeah. So very quickly, I want to connect. I mean, I don't want to derail us, but just because you talked about money out of politics and the need for us to educate people on the history of this and what are the legal frameworks for making this change, and like what are the signposts of how we got here and what we need to unwind. And again, I don't want to derail things and like go into great detail, but we're seeing in our work with MOP that there's actually risk, right? It like goes back to what I was talking about before about how people having a general understanding of the narrative, but not the specifics, which makes them vulnerable to somebody coming in and laying a different narrative on. And we are seeing actors within the money out of politics space, people talking about, oh, what we want is money out of politics, but it's becoming clear that their agenda is actually something different, and that they want to change the Constitution in ways that are not necessarily good for everybody. But they're coming and telling people, in order to get money out of politics, we need a constitutional amendment, which is good. But if the story only ends there, you are susceptible to all sorts of nefarious shit, which we are learning about now. So I think, to your point, Bobby, it would be it would be a good thing for us to do, to dig into this, make people understand what actually needs to be changed and what kind of scope for nefarious shit there is to help get people to protect themselves from.
I think I have an idea for a 3-part series that will culminate the final episode with Dr. Professor Siegel coming back on to discuss the ramifications and lack of safeguards around an Article 5 convention.
Yeah.
I think it's something that has got to happen now, given some recent developments in the organizing world, where people are infiltrating these circles for that nefarious reason, and really just sort of taking advantage of people who are trying to do the work, as it said. And the lack of education contributes to people and organizers operating from a position of negligence that really makes a lot of vulnerable people susceptible to scrutiny and targeting by this regimes. It's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, and I think I have a great idea that Professor Siegel would want to come on and talk about.
And look, guys, I'm very serious about getting Mr. Snyder on here. I will write a well written letter to express to him how important we understand his book is, and hopefully really legitimately get him on here. I'm looking very forward to that conversation. 2 fingers, Jesse. Like those are big ones, and they're big ones that we are kind of overdue, right? You know what I mean? So I've been missing this, man. And I think like we attack this next week, and especially, dude, if we're gonna say, hey, we're doing this thing next week, or what
I
So
think we
let's-
need to get it
I
there.
want
I
to
don't
wrap
think
up. I want to wrap up this one. I just want to recap for everybody to make it, sort of really clear about what we're talking about and how we deal with it, because the stakes are high, but the plan is not new. I think, like I said before, how this turns out for the American people is based on how the American people handle it right now. Every day, we have less and less power and ability to fight this. We're stronger today than we will be tomorrow. And I think it's important that everybody gets involved now, which you're seeing. Proud Americans finding their feet across the nation. But what Orban did wasn't magic, it wasn't destiny, and it sure as hell wasn't accidental, right? It's a modern authoritarian blueprint. And today we've touched on quite a bit about how that works. And the parallels to what's happening right now in the United States. So step 1, win big and claim that you have a mandate to do anything. Rewrite the rules before anyone notices, right? The step 2. And in the middle of those things, you capture the court, you control the media narratives to legitimize what you're doing and delegitimize opposition. You create, a common enemy to other people to help facilitate groupthink. And then you crush watchdogs, academics, and scientists, universities, journalists, activists, anyone that can hold you accountable. Step 6, build an economy of loyalty where power, money, and protection all flow through you. So that's Orban's blueprint, and it's the same pattern we're watching play out today in the United States, not by coincidence, but by design. One that has been in play for decades. As Jesse touched on when we first got here, this is a global project. What we're watching is mass collective attempt to weaken democracy, elevate strongmen, and convince the public they're safer with less freedom. And don't get me started on the quote. I think you've all heard it, especially in relation to the Second Amendment rights. But we're not trading our freedom for safety around here, and I don't think that's an American way. But here's the thing. Authoritarians aren't strong. They are brittle, and they depend on the projection of strength and people not paying attention. Americans have fallen asleep at the wheel, and Trump depends on your silence. He depends on your confusion and your exhaustion and your fear. So we have to flip the script and figure out how Americans come together to defeat what's happening. And I think if anybody wants to just run through the chapters of On Tyranny, that's a good way. But if we just have to go through it quickly, it's defend the rules as they're written, right? You defend institutions that keep powers in check. Back independent courts, back inspector generals, show up for local elections, fight gerrymandering, protect election workers, push for transparent audits of partisan boards, support journalists that expose corruption. Independent. I mean, we talked about this, I think, in one of the last episodes. It is so important right now, independent journalism. And each of you have the ability to become a watchdog and independent journalist. Don't be silent. Stand up for your neighbors. Blow the whistle, literally. In the ice rings, blow the whistle. And we have to build independent media ecosystems. Share reporting, not reaction. Please, for the love of God, pick up a book and learn how to discern facts from conclusion. Don't be part of the problem, because you take away from the legitimacy of people who are trying desperately to spread information that needs to be spread. And protect civil society. We have to protect everybody's rights to protect our own. If you don't like doing it for them, do it for yourself. And then I think last but not least, refuse to normalize this bullshit. Call it like you see it.
So as a Bay Area person, I love the Too Short quote, blow the whistle.
Hey.
Yeah. That's
Right.
literally what jumped into my mind was Too Short.
100%.
The thing, and I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to land on a more optimistic note also, right? There's this inclination for a lot of people to say, oh, we're cooked. And now when we hear the parallels with Hungary, it's easy to say, yeah, there you go, on tyranny. It's easy to say, oh, look how far along they are. Like, they're doing everything that they did in Hungary. We're cooked. Here's the thing. Hungary has a population that is 3% the population of the United States. The numbers don't work if people pay attention, right? And part of also for people that look like me, or the same gender as me, part of what drives complacency is privilege. So a lot of people that are not paying attention it's because they have the privilege of not paying attention. They don't have to be aware of how this stuff is landing on immigrant communities, landing on brown people's necks, because they don't have to, because it's not landing on their necks yet. Right? Because the next step after othering by ethnicity, after conducting warfare against people who look different than you genetically, is conducting warfare against people who are in different economic classes. So, the middle class will be hollowed out under authoritarianism, not only because you're going to be in a kleptocracy and all of the money is going to flow up into other people's pockets, but also a poor populace is easier to control. Because if you don't have time and energy to commit to try to be activists and to try to make your country better, because you're just scratching out an existence, it becomes easier for those regimes to stay in power. We see that throughout South America. That's like a continual and ongoing, pattern that we see in South America is dictators and authoritarian governments are able to hold on to power by keeping the people poor and scratching for a living. So Joey just went off camera, but I was actually trying to set up the bump for the spike from Joey on that, because I know where he's going to go once I point it out.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, man. You're 100% right. Gosh, man. Yeah, you're speaking to my soul right now. You know that. This is giving me, I'll be honest with you, right? Specifically right now, and you guys kind of know somewhat in the background what's going on here, but the courts in particular right now are so, I think, important to me. And it's important that you all pay attention to the way that the courts are operating. Okay. That's the best thing that I can say to you. Pay attention to how these courts are operating, right? Because, the importance cannot be overstated, right? If you've ever had jury duty, right? And you guys have seen it, right? You've watched the movies. They say, jury, don't consider that, right? And you go, oh, but they already heard it, right? You know what I mean? Of course they're considering it at this point. But here's the thing, though. When it's you sitting there receiving those instructions, you cannot allow that to be part of the decision-making process. It's against the rules. Don't you manage to fucking do that? Don't you fucking manage to do your absolute best to uphold the integrity of the fucking system? Because that's your responsibility within it today.
All of ours.
It's all of ours, right? But when you're in that hot seat on jury duty, right, you try to get out of it, right? Hey, wait, look, we've all been there. But my point in saying this is when that system that even you individually have been a part of and have sought to uphold, when the people that are running it are not operating by that same standard, you got to understand the gravity of that. And we're seeing that compromise right now here today. We're seeing that compromise right now here today. Even you, right? And I don't mean to be insulting when I say that. Even you random listener. You know what I mean? But even you, as you sit there, you know that's what you would do. You know that's how seriously you would take it, because think about all the things that we hear. Better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6, right? People defer to giving you a chance to do your fucking constitutional duty. And we've got people.
But I do want to say, though, I want to give the American people some credit here, because they are standing up across this nation to defend their neighbors and to defend democracy. We have watched grand juries fail to indict people who have stood up against this regime systematically at this point. And I think that's really important to highlight. I think that people need to get credit for that and understand that the rest of the American people have your back when you choose to maintain integrity within our system. I think I'm just really proud of all of the videos from everywhere coming out, holding ICE agents accountable, holding, they're keeping their neighbors safe from groups of parents unloading children off of school buses together, to people blowing whistles and literally having a code for whether or not somebody is actively being abducted or if ICE is just in the area, for people demanding warrants and educating themselves on the Constitution and their rights. I think I think this model only wins if we let it. And I think the American people are awake and paying attention. And that's what I hope that we keep, sort of spreading that message while educating people, but also giving people their kudos and letting them know that you're doing the right thing, because these decisions are hard to make when you're putting yourself at risk. And we've talked about that before, but understand that just like you, there are millions of Americans making these hard decisions across the nation. So keep doing it. And I think we're going to have an episode hopefully on jury nullification soon. I have a contact at Free DC that I'm going to see if they will come on and talk about their jury nullification project. I'll update you guys on that later.
I guess last thing I want to say is, some people kind of look at what's going on and feel overwhelmed and say, well, what's the worst that could happen, right? And the worst that could happen is that these tactics and methods of authoritarianism solidify their claws and their tentacles in the institutions of democracy and use them for authoritarianism, and we will perpetually be in a state of authoritarian regime. This happens in other countries. Countries deal with authoritarianism for decades and decades, and it's just not something we should bring here to the United States. And to Bobby's point about fighting back on every street corner, politically, of course, not violently, I think one of the things I just want to add to what she's saying about us fighting in every area of democracy to make sure that we bring back democracy and not live in an authoritarian regime is to, like she said, read history. When you read history and you understand the reality and the nuance of how things actually are, you can then define who you are as an individual. You can define who we are as Americans and what America really means. And with that vision, it creates the basis for the fight itself, right? Because we believe America is liberal, right? Like liberal in the sense of the ideals of liberalism, right? Because we know America is a strong democracy and republic, because we are multicultural, because we can define who we are, it will give us the drive to fight on every field that we need to fight.
We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Nowhere in there does it say that one man gets to make the rules because he was elected.
The oldest written founding charter in continuous use on this globe, guys. Let's get it.
Listen, there's no way to close out the Constitution. Let me just say I love you guys.
Same.
Oh, I just wanted to talk about really briefly a headline that I just read that apparently a leaked memo shows that Trump DOJ orders FBI to create a list of Americans who are extremists to target. So I just want to tell you guys, I hope our names are touching on the extremist list. All right, guys. So as I mentioned earlier, authoritarians thrive when people shrug, and they fall when people refuse to look away. So it only works if people stay home, tune out, or give up. So don't. Not now, not here, not while there's so much on the line. The stakes are high, and they are yours. So let's take some ownership, pick up a book, vote, and protect your neighbors, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Disorderly Conduct Podcast, a production of the Public Integrity Network. We believe that the first step to taking back our democracy is getting money out of politics. Come find us at moneyoutofpolitics.org and we'll put you to work. In the meantime, get involved in your community. Volunteer at a soup kitchen. Start a rideshare service. Go to school board meetings. anything you can to make sure this government remembers that their powers derive from the consent of the governed.